Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Minister, I'm here to raise a serious matter brought to me by a constituent, a disabled woman who was in receipt of the employment support scheme. This support was fundamental, as it enabled her to carry out her role to be productive and to build a career on an equal basis with others. On the basis that this support was in place, she made the major decision to progress her career. Like any other employee, she successfully convinced a new employer that she should take on a more senior management role. She did so in good faith, on the reasonable expectations that the employment support which enabled her to perform her role would continue with her, just as her skills, experience and qualifications did, and indeed do for every other worker. She was shocked to discover this support would not transfer with her and would not be available to her new employer. This happened during the probationary period, where performance, productivity and the ability to carry out core tasks under heightened scrutiny. The removal of this support placed her in an impossible position. She now fears being unable to meet productive expectations, not because of inability or competence, but because the reasonable support that enabled her to do the job had been withdrawn. In effect, she had been penalised for ambition. Remaining in her previous role would have preserved her support. Her decision to progress her career has resulted in its removal. This places her in a significant disadvantage compared to her non-disabled peers and amounts to discrimination in practice. Article 27 of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability requires prohibition of discrimination in all matters concerning employment and obliges states to ensure reasonable accommodation and adopt efficient measures that enable disabled people to enter, remain and progress in employment. The Employment Support Scheme is just such a measure. It directly enables her to work and to develop a career on an equal basis with others. Replacing it with a wage subsidy scheme does little or nothing to support careers progression at middle or senior management levels, where success depends on personal supports for the employee rather than wages subsidies to the employers. Can I ask, Minister, that the removal of this scheme from those who currently avail of it and wish to progress their careers would be reviewed in light of the principles of providing A, reasonable accommodation, B, more expectations, 3, obligations under the Employment Quality Act, 4, the commitment of the UN Convention on Human Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and finally, the Equality Disability Strategies Employment Pillar.
Garmagad Gairlik is gone weakest in Chapter Cooney as on over Tovitic Ordo and you. I want to thank Deputy Cooney for raising this issue. The Employment Support Scheme was a scheme that was run by FOSS. It offered financial support to employers to cover a disabled employee's employment. The scheme was open to the private sector only. The Wage Subsidy Scheme came into operation as a pilot scheme in September 2005. It replaced the pilot programme for the employment of people with disabilities and the Employment Support Scheme, both of which were closed to applicants at that time. Following a review of its pilot phase, the Wage Subsidy Scheme was placed on a permanent non-statutory footing in October 2008. Participants on the pilot programme for the employment of people with disabilities became part of the Wage Subsidy Scheme. Any employee in an employment subsidised under the Employment Support Scheme in 2005, when the scheme closed to new applicants, was allowed to remain on the scheme, but only in that specific employment. If the employment covered by the Employment Support Scheme terminates or changes in the way suggested by Deputy Cooney, the employee cannot transfer their Employment Support Scheme to a new employment, but can instead apply for the Wage Subsidy Scheme. Expenditure on the Wage Subsidy Scheme over the last 5 years has been €2.95 million. The Employment Support Scheme closed to new applicants in 2005. At that time, there were 474 employees in receipt of payments under the scheme in respect of 404 employers. Currently, there are 36 employees still in payment, with 31 employers. The reduction has been due to changing jobs, to retirement, or switching to the wage subsidy scheme. Last year, the Department of Social Protection published a review of the wage subsidy scheme following a public consultation. The review made 6 recommendations, and I've allocated an additional €3.7 million to implement the review's recommendations. In April 2024, the minimum hours for the scheme are reduced from 21 to 15 hours. The wage subsidy scheme now includes employers in the community, the voluntary and the commercial semi-state sector, while the employment support scheme was open to the private sector only. In Budget 2026, we provided for an increase in the subsidy rates paid under the scheme and expansion with eligibility with regard to those with acquired disabilities, but I've also made changes to the supports available deputy to employers to make it more attractive for employers to work with people in disabilities. The employment support scheme is closed to new applications, but we are committed to legacy cases and continuing their payment until their employment ends. The programme for government commits to further reviewing the minimum hours requirement under the wage subsidy scheme for disabled people and to examining further increases in the payment rate. Those commitments are also reflected in the human rights strategy for disabled people to which you've referred to. I'm happy to discuss the specific case with you offline to see if we can support this person's employer with regard to the wage subsidy scheme, but also with regard to the workplace adoption scheme.
Thank you, Minister, for your update. Minister, the maximum wage under the wage subsidy scheme is 50% of the minimum wage. State policy is telling employers that disabled people can only work at entry level. We come at it from the other side. Build capacity and value by creating a pathway for those with a disability to progress to the highest levels they can attain, which is important for those people. Minister, the core issue here is that the new wage subsidy scheme is framed in terms of compensation an employer for an employee's perceived lack of ability. That is not empowerment, it's charity. The employment support scheme supports those with a disability to do a job to the fullest and has never been about a deflect, but about enabling people to contribute to an equal basis with others. The resources it has provided to this woman have allowed her to perform to the highest standard. This benefits her, her employers, her colleagues and the wider society, which is very, very important for people with disabilities, Minister.
Well, thank you, Deputy. And as I outlined, when the employment support scheme terminated or closed in 2005, there was 474 employees in respect of 404 employers. To date, we have 1,518 employers availing of the scheme with over 2,500 employees. We're a long way off where I want to be, and I'll be very focused on getting people with disability into the workforce, because I think they have extraordinary skill and extraordinary talent to offer. And I'm constantly reviewing the wage subsidy scheme. So in Budget 26, we provided an increase in the base rate of the wage subsidy from €6.30 to €7.50, which is an increase of over 19%. Employers with up to 6 employees under the scheme will be paid the base rate from next April. Employers between 7 and 16 employees are paid €8.50. Employers with 17 employees or more are paid €10 per